Welcome to the Configure Price Quote Podcast. My name is Frank Sohn and I'm the founder of CPQ Consulting. This podcast is 100% focused on Configure Price Quote, also known as CPQ, and will provide you useful insights into this topic. My guest today is Max Rudman, CEO and co-founder of Prodly. Max is the founder and former CEO and CTO of Steelbrick, which was acquired by Salesforce in 2015. And then he spent several years at Salesforce leading CPQ product management and broader quote-to-cash initiatives. At Prodly, which he co-founded with his brother Daniel in 2019, Max is focused on improving how companies manage and deploy complex Salesforce and CPQ data. He's based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm very excited to have him back. Max, welcome back to the CPQ podcast.
Thank you so much, Frank. Delighted to be here.
Very excited to have you here. So I wanted to start with some different questions for you, right? So, and my first one was I understand that you often speak about your mission to simplify and speed up enterprise software implementations. What was the origin of that goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking, Frank. When I think about kind of what we did at Steelbrick, right? I didn't invent CPQ, right? CPQ was invented many years, in fact, decades before Steelbrick. There were many sort of transformational companies in that space. What I feel like we really did well was to democratize CPQ as a category, right? We made it a lot faster and a lot cheaper for customers to implement this important technology and thereby made it more accessible to smaller companies, specifically mid-market companies, right? Whereas before it was the purview of the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. Now everybody could take advantage of this important technology. And so in some ways, what we're trying to do at Prodly is to sort of bring that outside of CPQ and make business software in general, starting with Salesforce, faster and easier to implement and maintain.
Excellent. And we will talk more about that in a minute. But before we go there, I wanted to ask you about something. So when I, as an immigrant, came to the US, I was already in my early 30s. So now you came as a teenager, right? And I guess that must have been a huge change. I was just wondering, what did that experience teach you about adopting and taking risks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you being an immigrant too would probably share that background. And I think a lot of great entrepreneurs I talk to sort of share that experience to various degrees. And, certainly my business partner, Steelbrick, Goddard, and, Matt Gorniak and a bunch of people there share that experience. And, look, I think in some ways it was maybe easier for me than for you at my age. And a lot of ways it was harder, right? I mean, the teenage years are hard enough as it is. And, moving from, Russia to US, or from the Soviet Union back then to US is a massive change. And so I think it's sort of like a case of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And, I think that was a formative experience for me, obviously. And it's and sort of in the way it relates to entrepreneurship and building businesses and taking risk is probably, it put a chip on my shoulder in some ways, right? And so I think I've always sort of wanted to make something of myself, and I think that drove a lot of the kind of the grit and persistence that you need to succeed as an entrepreneur.
Excellent. And I think you did achieve already more than most achieve, right? So it's a very good lesson. So, but anyway, you have had different roles along the way, right? So you were an engineer, you have founded a company, you were the product leader at Salesforce. Now you're back at CEO again at Prodly. And which of these roles felt most natural to you? And which one forced you to grow most as a person?
It's the answer probably, you asked several questions there, and the answer is probably different. So, what do I gravitate towards? Look, I'm a builder, I'm a product guy, I'm an engineer by training at heart. And so, in terms of sort of what's the essence of me, it's probably that, and it's building great products, right? Is what I enjoy. I think my gift probably is sort of like taking a business problem and translating it into an elegant technical solution, right? Both as a builder and as a product manager. So that's what I probably do best and where my talents lies. But in terms of what's more challenging is, obviously being a leader, a people leader, and sort of like as part of building these businesses, I had to get outside of my comfort zone as an engineer, as a builder, and learn the go-to-market side, the marketing, the selling, and while it's certainly not sort of my natural, the part that I naturally gravitate towards, it has been probably the bigger challenge. So what I'm good at and what I naturally gravitate is different than what's been most challenging.
Got it. But you're not afraid to address the more challenging parts as well. So I think that's probably the key takeaway. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, I think you have to be, right. And like, do I think I could be better? Of course, yeah, there's always room to improve. But yeah, no, you have to get outside of your comfort zone if you have any hope of being an entrepreneur. That is certain.
Let's talk about Prodly right now. What do you enjoy most about building Prodly at this point in time?
Well, I think it's a lot of obviously a lot is happening in our industry, right? With the agentic, AI revolution, and sort of like the nature of business software is changing. So that's sort of like the macro backdrop, right? But then within the Salesforce ecosystem itself, there's a shift to, the Agentforce platform, the agentic enterprise, and then even more sort of specific to what we do, there is a shift from the old generation CPQ, which was, the technology acquired by Salesforce when they bought my first company, Steelbrick, to the next generation quote to cash platform or revenue management platform that they built. And that's creating obviously a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities for both our customers and broadly.
Yeah. Excellent. And now I want to ask you one more personal question before we talk about more about Broadly, and that is, what was the most memorable trip that you can remember, and why was it memorable?
Most memorable trip, like a business trip or any kind of trip.
Whatever was most memorable, if it was a business trip, it was a business trip, or a private trip, I have no idea. What do you
Um,
think?
Probably like I remember like flying to Munich for a meeting with a prospect, a large telecommunications company, and I think it was like a 4 hour meeting. I ended up traveling for like 48 hours for a 2 hour meeting, so that was kind of fun. But
Yeah, that was memorable, not in the best way, but thanks for
it was
sharing.
fine. It was fine. Like it wasn't a bad experience, but I thought it was kind of I guess I was proud of my dedication to the cause.
Excellent. Good. Then let's talk more about Broadly. Max, for listeners who may be new to Broadly, can you explain in a couple of sentences what Broadly does specifically for Salesforce CPQ teams?
Sure. Prodly fundamentally is an application lifecycle management platform, ALM, aka DevOps. And what we do is we bring together IT and business operations teams to accelerate delivery of Salesforce changes. And of course, that drives, tremendous amount of business outcomes, right? Because when you think about certainly in the context of a quote to cash implementation, right? Every month, every week, every day, every hour, every minute that goes by that you don't have a pricing change live, or you haven't launched the product, right, is the money that your business is leaving on the table. So it's super critical, obviously, to have a well-oiled change management machine, a well-oiled change management engine, for you to fully realize the return on your quota cash investment. And this obviously applies outside of quota cash in other categories, in other Salesforce clouds and Salesforce in general.
And how many team members does the Broadly team have at this time?
We're about, I want to say about 40-ish, like somewhere like 35, depending like if you count the consultants and some of the contractors that we work with. But yeah, somewhere like mid-30s. I want to say mid-30s to 40s.
Yeah. And the customers are mostly in the US or global?
We have a global customer base. Obviously, they're pretty concentrated in North America market, but we have customers, everywhere from, US and obviously in EMEA and, Australia and New Zealand and Israel. So all over the world. Pretty global footprint, also like across various, all kinds of industries, right? I mean, if anything, we probably tend to skew sort of bigger customers, and that's because, change management, obviously, and, DevOps as a problem tends to be more relevant to bigger companies, right? Because if you're, 3-person startup, you probably don't care too much about change management, automation, or governance. You just like maybe making changes directly in production, and you have no auditors to worry about. So for that reason, we tend to skew to bigger customers. But other than that, I mean, it's a pretty horizontal solution.
And in preparation for this meeting, Max, I was looking a little bit on the website on Prodly and stuff like this, and I saw you were talking about CPQ data deployment, right? And what kind of CPQ assets are you talking about here? Products, bundles, price rules, discount schedules, approvals, or something else?
Yeah, it's all of the above. It's all of the above, right? Like CPQ, if you look at the CPQ in just the configuration data model part of CPQ data model, just the configuration part of the data model, right? So excluding the transactional data model, things like quotes, quote lines, right?
Yeah.
Subscriptions, that's transactional data. Just the configuration part of the data model is, I want to say like 2, 3 dozen different objects, right? And so obviously you're not deploying or changing all of them every single time, but between those dozens of objects, there's hundreds and hundreds of relationships that have to be, handled and remapped properly. Like records could be created in the sandbox, or it could be modified. So you need to track. And of course, the Salesforce IDs change when that happens, right? So there's a problem with record matching as well. So these are really the problems that we're solving for our customers. To do it manually is obviously a very tedious, error-prone, and time-consuming endeavor, and that's why we built Prodly, right? Like Prodly, the idea for Prodly was born out of the pain that we had at Steelbrick with deploying CPQ projects. It literally used to take our most experienced solution architect the entire weekend to deploy a CPQ project from sandbox to production, right? And they had to be the most experienced solution architect, or at least somebody like a solution architect, because you had to understand the data model, right? Like you can't just get somebody off the street and hand them off the data loader and say, go, right? They have to understand the data model. They have to understand that the price rule object goes before the price condition, right? And so it was really super, super error prone, super tedious, and super inefficient, right? Because you're tying up your most expensive, most senior resources with this mind-numbing, tedious work.
Hmm. And when you look at customers, I think what's unique about the CPQ data model that customers should understand from your point of view?
Well, there's actually not like there's some nuances to the CPQ data model, but that's actually exactly the point. CPQ is just one example. It's just one use case of this problem, right? The problem is broader, and there's other examples of it. The field service has the same problem, e-commerce, like rebate management. There's a whole bunch of like Salesforce product and different categories of systems that, that are configured with complex data, right? And so that's really the problem we're solving. And I'm glad you sort of, asked me about this, because that's the biggest differentiator between us, our platform and some of the competitions, right? It's not just about supporting CPQ. We have a general purpose engine that is application agnostic. And, it was built for CPQ. It works great for CPQ, but it works for really anything else as long as it's on Salesforce platform. And that's the reason why we were able to be first to market with support for, RCA, or ARM as it's now called, right? The next generation quota cache platform, because we didn't build the solution that was hard-coded to CPQ. We built a general purpose engine that could be easily configured to support any data model.
Are you evaluating CPQ solutions? The Novo CPQ briefing subscription gives you vendor-neutral briefs you can read in minutes. They are built for the early step of selection, moving from a long list to a focused shortlist of 5 to 10 vendors. Each brief explains capabilities, where it fits, and what to watch out for. No hype. Many subscribers pair the briefs with AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini to search faster and compare options. If you want clarity before RFPs and demos start, learn more at novocpq.com/cpq-briefing-subscription. Shortlist faster. Can you walk me through a simple example, say a new bundle or pricing update, and explain what a Prodly managed deployment looks like end to end?
Yeah, so let's take this example, right? Like maybe you want to create a new bundle or you want to change the price rule. It doesn't matter what the change are. If you're a customer of a certain size, which whatever, probably different and it depends on your industry, but let's say if you're big enough, 500 employees and up, maybe 300 employees and up, right? But some certain size where you have enough of the governance requirements, you have enough of the business risk of a change being, bringing down your system, your mission critical system that is in the revenue stream, Salesforce CPQ. You're not going to make this change directly in production. You're going to make it in the sandbox. And you probably have what's called a pipeline where it's not just like one sandbox and you go to production. You probably have a dev sandbox and then you move it to some other sandbox for maybe like system integration testing, or maybe it's just like pre-testing. And then there might be UAT if it's a change that's big enough, right? So the point is it's not just like one deployment from one sandbox to production. There's actually multiple deployments. And if the change is big enough, right, you might have different sprints and you may have different iterations of it. So to make like one change, it could be, anywhere from half a dozen to multiple dozens of deployments. And for you to do this manually, you would have to go and export the data from every object that's involved, and you have to like remap the IDs in Excel probably because they've changed, and you have to go re-import it in the target org one by one. And so it's a really tedious, error-prone and time-consuming process. And with Prodly, you can basically do it with a click of a button.
Excellent. We already talked about that. That obviously works for Salesforce CPQ. Would it also work for other CPQ solutions? Any one of there are 135 different ones. Could you work with any of them as well?
We can work with any CPQ solution as long as it's built on Salesforce platform today. But the way we are architected and our premise was always to be sort of like the DevOps for business systems. So we do have in our roadmap to add connectors to other platforms. But right now, it has to be in Salesforce.
And what do you typically see as the root cause of risky or failed CPQ deployments, right? So is that, I have an idea, missing dependencies, inconsistent sandboxes, manual steps, release timing, whatever it is?
Yeah, I think what I see mostly in terms of deployments is just people doing it manually, honestly, right? And I think there's sort of like two buckets of manual that I see. Sometimes, folks would use sort of like the data loader, right? Like the manual exporting and going through the steps that I talked about. And other times they're for certain kind of changes, they're basically like just rekeying them in production, which like I always found to be crazy. And obviously that has all kinds of problems from sort of a governance standpoint, but also from them being error prone. So, I mean, really at the end of the day, other than like massive loss of productivity and employee dissatisfaction of being, forced to do this mind-numbing work, there's just massive kind of business risks, right? And it's sort of like one of those things like insurance, right? Like it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? And it may seem like, paying premiums is a waste until you get into an accident, and like you never know when that's going to happen. So I think it's the same sort of thing here. It may work fine, 50 times, but on the 51st, you key in the price rule wrong, and guess what? You've just, brought your entire CPQ revenue generating business system to a screeching halt. That's not good.
Excellent. Now let's talk a little bit about the transition from your old company, or what's now Salesforce CPQ, to ARM, right? So I see that more customers evaluating this move, right? So I was wondering if you're seeing or what you're seeing basically, and what are the biggest surprises when companies start that journey from your perspective?
Well, the first thing that we tell, I tell the customers that I talk to, and, it's a hard conversation to have, but, it's the one that must be had is it's not an upgrade, right? And that's sort of like counterintuitive because, right, like, well, it's a CPQ, Salesforce CPQ is a Salesforce product,
Mm,
Revenue Cloud Advanced, now called ARM, Agentforce Revenue Management is also a Salesforce product, but it's a different product. And so, like, that's the first sort of conversation, that needs to be had. And I think there's one way to look at this. Well, like I have to kind of like re-implement and like do all this work again, but I think it's a wrong way to look at it. Because it's a different platform with a different set of capabilities and much more advanced capabilities in a lot of areas, it's really an opportunity to do things better, right? To refactor and to take advantage of the new functionality to achieve positive business outcomes, right? Whether it's being able to manage your product catalog at scale better, or reduce SKU proliferation, or enable, omni-channel selling use cases, or enable different pricing models, right? Like whatever it may be, um, ARM definitely is a more advanced platform for a lot of these things. And so if I were a customer, that's kind of how I would look at it, right? It's not a re-implementation of the same thing. It's an opportunity to sort of advance your quota cash transformation and achieve meaningful business outcomes.
Help me understand as a customer, if I want to move from, I've decided I use from Salesforce CPQ, I'm moving over to the new ARM solution. How would a typical Broadly project look like? So how much time do you need? How much work is involved? How does it typically look like?
Right. Yes, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think you're really asking is like how much can we save on the migration part of it, right? And like first thing I will say is when you look at the whole project, which is what you should be looking at, right? Migration is probably a small part of it, right? Hopefully it's a small part of it.
Yeah.
Right. So within and we don't like we're not an SI. We don't provide services. Just to be clear, like we're a tool provider. We're an ISV. So we just provide the tooling. So you need to work with somebody who knows what they're doing on as a partner, whether it's internal, like if you have the expertise internally, great, right? But you need to have somebody who understands the functionality of the new platform and can effectively configure it to achieve these positive business outcomes I talked about. So once you do that, then like obviously there's the question of migrating data from CPQ, and I like to think of it in these like sort of four buckets. One is the product catalog, then you have pricing, then you have transactions, which is quotes and orders, and then you have the install base, right? Your subscriptions, your assets, your contracts. And what we can support sort of migrating really varies depending on, in each of these buckets. And like, for example, bundles, we can migrate pretty well, and there's a bunch of other things that we can migrate well, pretty much automatically. There's a bunch of things that it's not possible to migrate. For example, price rules, right? Like there's no price rules in ARM, so there's really no place to put it. But the bigger point I want to hit on is like just because you can migrate some things doesn't mean that you should, right? So in the example of the product catalog and like the bundles, like yeah, we can absolutely go and recreate all these products and bundles in ARM and do it with a click of a button, but that's a lift and shift migration, right? So again, don't waste this opportunity to move the quota cash transformation forward. And if you're gonna refactor your product catalog, take advantage of the ARM functionality that allows you to, let's say, reduce SKU proliferation, you should absolutely do that, right? And if you do that, then you aren't really migrating a product catalog from CPQ, right? You're building it in ARM. One place where you definitely need to do migration and where we absolutely can help you and provide massive value there is the install base, right? So migrating your assets, your subscriptions, your contracts, And there's a lot of complexity in that. And I think that's the bit that I'm sort of most proud of, and where we like certainly every customer can derive a lot of benefit from doing that. Like how much that like translates in terms of, our dollar savings or hours, it's hard to say because obviously it all depends on the customer. But broadly speaking, this is the area where, I think our migration tool brings the most value.
Got it. And I think what you're talking about is the one-time effort, but you can also use Prodly on an operational basis. Tell me a little bit more about that, please.
Absolutely. So forget about migration. Let's say it's a greenfield implementation, right? Like again, the same applies. Like you better not be configuring it in your production org, right? You're going to be configured in your sandbox. And so the problems that we solve for CPQ with respect to it being heavily configured with configuration data, with data, certainly exists in RCA and ARM. In fact, it's even bigger problem because the configuration data model is more complex, right? With power comes complexity, right? Like complexity and power and simplicity rarely go hand in hand. And so you're gonna have a problem with like if you're gonna do this deployments manually, like you're gonna have a big problem in terms of your delivery timelines and being able to deploy all of this ARM config into production on a timely manner. So we can absolutely help drive a lot of value with accelerating the implementation project just by automating the deployments of RCA config between environments. And then finally, right, like the last piece of it, the third piece is like post go live, right? When you are like, as I always say, the go live of a CPQ project, of a quote to cash project is the beginning of the journey. It's not the end. And you're going to be making changes, right? You're going to be tweaking your pricing. You're going to be, tweaking your products. You're going to be launching new products. Like all of these things are going to require you to deploy configuration changes between environments, and that's where Prodly really excels.
And then let me ask another question on this topic, right? So I guess you could even export the wrong stuff to the production system. So the question is, do you also have version control that somebody can fall back if something went wrong? I guess that's available, right?
Absolutely. It's a big part of sort of our value add is we basically, like if I were to distill it very simply, what we allow our customers to do is to treat the config that is stored as data as they treat any other config, as they treat metadata config, right? Which
Mm.
version controlling it, putting it through the CI/CD, DevOps process. Like this whole sort of distinction, like between data and metadata, is an artificial one. That's an artifact of the way Salesforce platform works and the way some of these products are configured, right? But when you think it from the customer standpoint, config is config, right? I don't care if it's a flow or, a trigger or, or page layout, or if it's record data for a product catalog or a price rule, right? Like it's all config and it all needs to go together, and it all needs to be version controlled so that I can roll it back if there's, a catastrophic failure. And that's the gap that we help bridge really.
Excellent. Now, a couple of customers will obviously stay on Salesforce CPQ and probably a good chunk of customers, right? So for the near term, what release cadence and governance approach do you recommend so that they don't accumulate CPQ technical debt?
Well, I don't think Salesforce is certainly forcing anyone to upgrade to the new Revenue Cloud, but I think it's clear that's the future, right? And sort of like the writing is on the wall from that standpoint. They did announce end of sale, I think earlier this year. It is not to be confused with end of life, right? Or end of life, which is end of support. So it is still an active product that is well supported, certainly from the like customer support standpoint. But, I think what I would say, if you're a Salesforce CPQ customer, you should probably be thinking about where are you going to go, like whether it's, RCA or not, that's a different question. But, you know, you have to go somewhere because at some point it will be sunset. And, I'm not saying it's going to happen next month or next year. I mean, like Salesforce is really good about treating like it's an enterprise software company, right, with good policies. I mean, there's probably years of support at least, on the product. But, you know, it behooves you to start planning now because, right, you can't just stay on Salesforce CPQ forever.
No, and that makes perfect sense. And to have you there probably makes a lot of sense since you founded Salesforce CPQ, right? Or now the predecessor company Steelbrick, right? So and know it really well. Also worked at Salesforce. Where can customers see you? Are there any events in the new year where they can see you and learn a little bit more about Prodly or talk to the team? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to be in New York next week for the Agentforce World Tour. I will not be in Chicago the following week, but I'm usually at all these, Agentforce, the major Agentforce World Tour events. Certainly will be at Dreamforce next year. But in the meantime, your listeners can find me on LinkedIn. Please visit our website at prodly.co. Not com co and we usually post the events that we're attending there as well. If they want to sort of chat with me about like get my perspective on RCA and CPQ and change management, anything and everything, probably the best place would be to just reach out to me on LinkedIn, just DM me, and I'm pretty good about responding and happy to have a chat.
And we will have all these links in the show notes. As always, Max, thank you very much for making time for the CPQ podcast today.
Frank, thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoy our conversation every time, and I hope to be back at some point in the future.
Absolutely, no question. I'd like to thank everyone for listening and hope you learned something interesting today. If you like the podcast, please go ahead and rate it on iTunes or share it with your friends and colleagues. In the meantime, you can find us online at www.novocpq.com. So long, everyone.